Hey, how's everybody doing? Today it's let me see. Today it's September 20th. How time flies, right? I mean, before you know it, 2020, it's over. How's everybody doing? Um, well, today I want to share with you that one particular skill that I believe is the most underrated skill ever. And but before I get into that, I just want to give you a heads up. What's going to happen here on this show is that we are going to pivot to a show where we talked about learning and teaching. So, because we recognize that during this period itself, there are a lot of people who have got the expertise, but for some reason, they may not be able to find or they may find themselves in a situation that they want to consider leveraging this digital revolution to be able to digitalize their expertise. And so we're going to pivot to that and we're going to go deep into the frameworks, the structures, the processes, and the fundamentals of this whole process of digitalization of your expertise itself. So, if you want to learn more, please subscribe to this channel. We may, at this moment in time, we have not decided, but we may continue with broadcasting from this channel itself, or we may consider broadcasting from a brand new channel. So that's something that we have not decided yet. But what has been decided is that we're going to pivot. When that's going to happen, it's going to be in mid-October. And so that's going to coincide with a couple of launches. So make sure you stay tuned. All right. In any case, if you follow me on Facebook, I will definitely be posting updates on that. And so you will be able to catch what's the latest update and what's the launch date as well. Plus, in addition to that, what we are going to do is we are going to dissect a few flywheels. So, people who have been leveraging digital tools to build a digital business, we want to dive deep into not just the funnel itself, but the whole ecosystem, the whole concept, the whole idea of the belief, the philosophy, the strategies, as well as the processes, the tools that enable them to achieve this goal. So it's not just hacking back or reverse engineering somebody else's marketing funnel, right? Because that has been done by many people. What we want to do is we want to go even deeper, understanding the philosophy, the belief, the strategies, the processes as well as the tools, and then you will get a better sense of whether what you can adopt and what you must adapt in order to build your 1% 1 million old digital business. So today we're going to talk about this most underrated skill, and to me I think it's the most underrated skill because many a times when you talk to people, they are always talking about, oh, I need to learn this new technology, or I need to do this new app, or I have people who are in their 40s and they're coming to me and they say that, well, I see you doing videos and I want to learn from you. And I think that is great. But I think deeper than that, there is something else that we may not have enough conversation about that skill itself. And that one skill is the most underrated skill that we want to talk about in this episode here today. But before that, I will want to tell you a story. And this story has got great significance to this most underrated skill. And I would also want to share with you what happened then. And I am going to give my analysis and my insights into whether that's going to work in today's context or not. So to tell you the story, we need to go back to 1997. Now, for those of you who are familiar with 1997, this was when Asia faced what we call the Asian financial crisis. Now, the Asian financial crisis was, although it started with the financial industry itself, it soon spilled over to other sectors. And as a result of that, very quickly in those days, right? Very quickly, companies, multinationals started re-evaluating their strategy of what they should, where they should be in their manufacturing, in their production, in their research and development, in their design. Where should they locate? And so in 1997, it was one of those recessions that in Singapore, we see it as a structural recession. Now, how is that different from other kinds of recession? To give you an example, in 1985, Singapore went through one of the first most serious major recession since independence. And in 1985, the recession was I mean, arguably, you know, the few theory and argument behind that. But the one theory has it that at that point in time, the National Wage Council made a proposal to increase the CPF contribution rate. And because of that increase, and that increase was, it has a tremendous effect on the economy. And as a result of that, many of the companies were struggling. And as a result of that, they decided to lay off the people. And that's where we got into a recession. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the technicalities, technically, an economy goes into recession when you register 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So when you register 2 quarters of negative growth, it means that technically the economy is in a recession. So in 85, the recession happened, but very quickly we decided, we as in the Singapore government, we decided to reverse some of these policies, and very quickly the economy bounced back. Now, what happened when the economy bounced back was that people who lost their jobs during the recession, they were able to find the same kind of jobs after the recession when the economy picks up. So if they were for example, if they were a bus driver or if they were an office clerk, they will probably lay off. And when the economy picks up, they could once again get another job as a bus driver or as a office clerk. So that was 85. Now, when we came into 97, what happened was, like I mentioned earlier on, we went into this thing called a structural unemployment. And with the structural unemployment, what happens is that the economy, the structure of the economy changed. And this means that some of the jobs that were lost were never coming back, even if the economy recovers. So for instance, there were certain industries and certain group of people who used to have jobs in the factory as a production worker, for example. After 97, what happened was these jobs became very, very few because it became structurally, Singapore became too expensive for factories to locate here. And so they started going over to places like Batam, Indonesia, because it's arguably cheaper in terms of rental, as well as land costs, as well as labor costs. And so it kind of pushes up the level of the labor in a sense that, it requires you to be able to do a higher value add job. So think about this: factory workers were not able to find factory work anymore. And so what they need to do is they need to look at what other jobs are available. And the problem is some of the jobs that were available, they were not qualified for that. And so you have this issue whereby there are jobs opening. However, the people who have been displaced were not able to fit or qualify for those jobs because they do not have the skill. And so that caused the government to sit up and notice, because at that point in time, you see the transition of going from labor intensive, that means relying on labor to do the job, to what you call capital intensive. That means we rely more on machines, computers, and automation to do the job. So for those of you who are my age, you would remember that when you were going to school, and if you have to take the bus, you would have to pay your fare to this person called the bus conductor. Now, the conductor is the person who actually collects a fare from you and then issue you a ticket, clip the ticket, and issue you a ticket. Now, when you come into the 1990s, we started going the route of one-man operation and a one-ticket system. In other words, when you bought the bus itself, there is no conductor who will collect money from you and issue you a ticket. You would actually drop your money into this box, and the driver would then punch the ticket. And so the driver becomes that one-man operation of the bus. They no longer require two people on the bus. So in effect, overnight, when that was implemented, half the workforce in the transport industry was made redundant. Now, of course, they were able to retrain these people from bus conductors to bus inspectors. So you see, the transition was of a higher level. I mean, it goes from just being a bus conductor to a bus inspector, to a ticket inspector, right? So this person would board a bus at random locations. He or she would go up to the bus and he would start checking everybody's ticket to make sure that people actually paid their fares and they paid the right fares. And so think about that. The person who used to be issuing tickets are now trained to inspect the ticket. Although he or she is it's doing a higher value add job, that possibility of retraining was there. And so the government saw this as a great thing to do. And so we formulated this thing called the People Developer Standard. Now, the People Developer Standard, essentially what it does is that, it's modeled after the investor in people that you have in the UK. And that framework itself, that national human resource framework, essentially what it does is twofold. One is that it kind of levels up the entire nation's HR practices. Because prior to 97, only the bigger MNCs and the larger government-linked companies would have good practice or best practices in terms of HR. The small and medium-sized enterprises or even some large local companies may not have a transparent HR policy, right? You get hired because you know the boss, and you get promoted because you know the boss, right? And so the HR policy was not transparent, and because it's not transparent, it creates a lot of distrust. And so when the government introduces the people developer standard, what it means is that it wants the entire nation company to level up their HR practices. And one of the things that really encourages companies to do is that constantly retraining of your people. So you do not wait until the technology becomes available and then you go, oh, what should I do? Right? You kind of start training your people so that they are ready when the technology becomes mainstream. Now, herein lies a problem because if you are a company, it may not be in your um, best interest to invest so much in retraining of your people because there are lots of companies who think that if I train you and then once you are qualified, you get poached by the competitors and I lose a great person. And so what the government did was they decided to incentivize companies. So what it does was that it came up with this policy that if you embark on this people developer standard, if you achieve the standard, the government would actually give you additional subsidy when you retrain your staff. And for selected courses, you even get a higher level of subsidies or incentive to train your staff. And so the government kind of co-share the cost of you training your people. And that I would say, led to a great success because we went from 97, the Asian financial crisis to the dot-com. And many of our people were, in fact, prepared and trained and able to take on some of the new jobs that come along. And so we have always lauded this idea of lifelong learning. And we always talked about this idea of learning, right? You learn learning becomes a lifelong pursuit. It just doesn't stop when you finish school. So that's the whole idea behind that. So we have this thing called lifelong learner, LLL, right? And so if you ask me about the most underrated skill, I would say that the most underrated skill ever is the skill of learning, right? It's the skill of learning. But to add to that, I would like to qualify and say that that may be true in the 90s or even in the early 20s. Because when you look at how the economy transformed, it was more gradual. If you were to put it on the chart itself, you probably see a smoother curve like this. But what happened right now is that the economy is transforming in a somewhat abrupt manner. So instead of looking at it as a smooth curve, you probably have like this, and then it kinks upward. And what that means is that you have this whole industry being disrupted, and no amount of training and reskilling is going to enable your people to very quickly adapt to, as well as embrace those new skills and be able to be employed in those industries itself. If I can give you an example, if you look at the trade of a tourist guide, of whom my dad is a tour guide for many, many years. So when this whole travel and tourism industry was being disrupted, it leaves very little possibility for this group of tourist guide to reskill themselves so that they can still be relevant in today's tourism industry context. And no amount of training is just going to do that. Why? Mainly because the demand for tourist guides have plummeted. Why? Because of the availability of Google Map, right? I'm sure if you have traveled in the last 5 years, you would in some way, shape, and form depended on Google Map to get you from one place to another. I definitely had, especially during my family's one-year travel adventure. And so no amount of training is going to be able to prepare this group of people who have been displaced because the entire industry has changed. And it's just not possible, at least quick enough, to reskill, retool these people so that they are able to be still relevant in this new refresh 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 industry. And so when I talked about the most underrated skill, the skill isn't about learning. The skill, it's about learning to learn. Because it's not about that you can learn. Everyone can learn, of course, right? And some of us, of course, we had little choice, but because of circumstances, we have to learn because our life depended on it. But the point is that learning in and of itself isn't the answer. The answer actually lies in our ability to learn how to learn. And unfortunately, I think many of us are entering into this phase, especially post-COVID-19. We're entering into this phase using a very antiquated way of learning, and we are bringing that into the new normal. As an example, in the past, how we learn is we probably attend a course, we probably read a bunch of books, we probably go for a certification program. All that's well and good. Yes, I mean, people should be qualified and all that. But think about that. By the time these people go through all the process, what they only had is just head knowledge. But if you are an employer, would you be just willing to employ someone who is over 40 and just had the head knowledge but have no experience at all? Pretty unlikely, right? And so I believe that the government's spiel about the way to resolve any unemployment situation in today's context, it's about retraining our people. While I beg to differ, and I believe that it is not just retraining. Yes, retraining, it's one of the elements, but more importantly, is to teach people a new way of learning. And so we always have to re-examine the way that we have learned and to ask ourselves, how can we learn better? Is there a different way of learning? Is there a possibility to learn something in a reverse format. What I mean by that, a lot of time we learn, or we think we learn, by reading literature, reading content, textbooks, for example. But what if the best way to learn is to learn by doing? And the best way to learn is to learn by teaching. Because I'm sure you've heard of that phrase. If you want to learn something, teach it. Well, that's food for thought. Share with me what are your thought about that. Whether learning how to learn is that the key to survival in this new normal. But with that, thank you for watching. And tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the different ways of learning. And if that's something of interest to you, make sure you stay tuned. Subscribe, thumbs up, like, follow, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.